Yes, my name is Ernest Ernie Gordon. My father was Ernest Ernie Gordon. And when Mother shouted, Ernie, two of us came running, so I was nicknamed Sonny. And still people today call me Sonny. I was born the 15th of April 1933 at Railway Terrace, Wallsend on Tyne, a true Geordie. Being with a railway family, mum and dad working for the LNER, the London North East Railway, father's job was governed by appropriate employment. So we then moved up to the north of the county, up in Tweedmouth, and back to Belford, and back to the borders again, and then down to Upham, ULGHAM, where I grew up and went to school at Longhurst, and then Pegswood. Upon leaving school in those days, it was 15 years of age, I went into the building trade as an apprentice stonemason, bricklayer. I didn't have any friends or neighbours who didn't have a job. We all had work. But that 6 years apprenticeship, on top of a young life of discipline from my father, stood me in good stead all my life. 6 years of meticulous workmanship, quality, standards, and self-discipline, which I didn't realize at that age that this is what I was getting. But from the discipline of the regime, the master and the apprentice, I was getting all this within me and stood me in good stead. Till the end of my apprenticeship, when I did a further 2 years national service, in starting off in the Northumberland Fusiliers at Fenham Barracks, no longer there. Then straight off to Malaya for 20 months, unbroken, on active service in the jungles of Malaya, which I managed to survive, but quite a lot of us never did come back. And on my return to the UK in uniform, I was immediately demobbed, having turned down an offer of a commission, because all I wanted to do was get rid of that uniform and get back to civilian life. I was married, brought up a family, and still in the building trade. I suffered the first of my very serious accidents. I fell from a scaffolding 60 feet and was smashed to pieces. A Humpty Dumpty job, if ever there was one. And it took 14 to 18 months to rebuild me at the RVI, Ward 17, and get back on my feet. And following that, after another year, I've just been married, I had a serious accident on a work site in Ashington where my back was broken. And so I couldn't follow my trade anymore because of my injuries. After all the trauma of the plaster cast and the recovery period, I entered local government in the town of Morpeth Borough. And there it was great. I was put in charge of all the frontline services. And after 7 years in Morpeth town, my then boss advised me there was no career progression available here. I should move and qualify and get on the management ladder in local government. And I took his advice and took my family away down to Essex County, in which I was the works manager, back to Leicester City as Public Works and Services Manager, up to Nottingham as Director of Public Works, until the late 70s, when industrial strife really was taking a big grip on this country. From Land's End to John O'Groats, it wasn't just, it was simmering. And being in frontline management of local government, I employed up at one time 2,300 total staff of all grades in transport, in lighting, in heating, in highways, in housing, in parks, gardens, sewers, drainage, and so on. And it became virtually impossible to manage because of the hotheads in the country who thought that they knew more about my job than I did. And I was being told not only what to do, but how to do it by people who didn't know my job. And I didn't take very kindly to this. And if you get to a management level, whatever walk of life, if you can't manage, what's the point in being there? So I upped sticks in 1980, and I went off to Saudi Arabia with Aramco, the fifth biggest company in the world. And I became director of housing maintenance and services in Dhahran in Saudi for 8 years. Came back here, went to the county council, consultant engineer with Northumberland for 4 years. And they said, you can retire tomorrow. And I did. Just like that. And that was 25 years ago.
So you said that you were born in Wallsend. What do you remember about the shipyards and that massive industry?
Something about Wallsend, it's had this magnetic attraction to me. Once I had some free time on my hands at weekends and evenings and that, I used to get on my bike and bike from Upham to Wallsend to find out where I was born. And there was the massive Tyne. I mean, that Tyne to me is bigger than the Amazon. It was the greatest waterway in the world. Because as a youngster, I can remember going back with my brother later on in life, because I moved from Wallsend in a shoebox up north. And but later on, my brother took me and we see these massive ships going up and down. What was the song? I'm going to leave old Durham town. And the ships going up and down the Tyne. Well, that song is very pertinent for this. But all the while, from being a young man at Upham, traditional music, the music of Northumberland and the borders, and in particular Scotland, has haunted me and still haunts me today because I still play it. My son's a world-class Highland piper, plays with Los Angeles Scots, America's top pipe band. I organised the World Pipe Band Championships in Nottingham in 1979, 50 years this year. I've been on the National Council of the Scottish Pipe Band Association. But my personal contact was with the old maestros here in Northumberland, the Jack Armstrongs, Billy Pegg, Joe Hutton, Willie Taylor. And I grew up with these fellas, and they taught me all that they could teach me about genuine Northumbrian music, the traditional music, and which is still part of me yet. Been recording today on harmonica, because my fingers don't go round the pipes like they used to. And when I'm finished this interview, I'm going along to the Fleece, because it's a traditional music line. It's just a lovely part of my life.
So when did you come to Alnwick? When did you move here?
Pardon?
When did you move to Alnwick? When did you come here?
I was quite happy living in Rennington. when I came back from Saudi Arabia
When was that?
in 97, 98. When there were some improvements done to the house, and a couple of days after it went up in flames. My dear little cottage in Rennington was no more. So I was lucky to get a little cottage in Alnwick. By this time I was away from my family back here living alone. And I've lived in the cottage ever since. And I shall live there till I decide to quit. It's so convenient.
So, going to the 1980s, what were you doing for a job in the 1980s?
In the 80s,
Yeah.
resulting from the turmoil of the mid and late 70s, was the reason why I found it impossible to manage, which I had been trained as a young man. And I'm now in my middle 30s, coming up 40. And to be told you can no longer do your job without someone overriding everything you did took very hard to swallow. And yet I had every sympathy. It wasn't as if I didn't know anything about the working man. My brother and my father came home. He couldn't stand up. He was so tired. But when I got up in the morning, he'd been away 2 hours to work, and he was back again. And so the opportunity came to either move back north. And then one day I was reading a newspaper, and then it said, maintenance engineer wanted for Saudi Arabia. 3 times the salary I was getting in the city of Nottingham. Tax-free. I was on 3 months' notice. I up sticks, and on the 1st of April, 1980, I got off the plane. It was like walking into the oven when it's on for Sunday dinner. This is Saudi Arabia, and I spent 8 years making a fortune, paying off my mortgage, educating my 2 boys, and never had any debt in my life.
So when we were talking, you said you did have some sympathy with the miners' strike. How did the miners' strike affect your job in the 80s?
The miners were instigators, is not the word. The miners were the chosen few of all the big employees or employers in the country. And the strength of the miners.
Sorry, reposition. Let's go back to the beginning of this question because it's important to get it. Notice you had a reposition. Talk about that again. Ask that question again, please.
How did the miners' strike affect your job in the 80s?
Because the spin-off from their action came into local government, whereby all not just me, I'm talking from every local authority in the British Isles, were on strike at one time or another. If it wasn't the refuse men, it was the sewer men. If it wasn't the sewer men, it were the highways. If it wasn't the highways, it was the housing. And it was strategically planned across the country. But the original group of lads who began all this came from Cropston, just north of Nottingham. And they were the first guys to go on strike in the late 90s, late 70s. And of course I followed this, once I got in, even in Saudi, I followed it all the way. And it got to the stage, how it affected me, I was unable to manage. I had been brought up with a discipline of respecting my elders and respect to my father, my parents, and anyone who knew more than me. But for a group of people to come along who weren't trained in my profession began telling me what I could do and what I couldn't do was bad to take. Just as they would not take what I was telling them. In other words, I want you at work. I don't want you on strike. This is what we pay you for. You come to work. There are guidelines, there are channels of communication, of action, but they weren't taken. It was the blunt end, everybody out. And when you see refuse piled up, still is today in Birmingham, last week. I don't know whether you saw the pictures. This desperation. And yet I had all this sympathy, all this empathy, and yet I couldn't support them because it went against what I had been brought up. And yet I could understand what they were shouting for and crying for. And yet I couldn't say, well, okay, I give in, because I was too much my own boss to submit to that. And so they had my sympathy, but I had to keep it to myself, otherwise I would have been called a traitor or what is it they call him? Had another name. Scam. And that's why I ran, I got out. I can't take this.
What does scout mean?
A traitor. In their eyes, as I had traitors in my camp working for the opposition that I didn't believe till I found out, sitting with ACAS in the city chambers. But I don't know whether you remember a chap, a great friend of mine. Bill Morris was the first coloured trade union general secretary, as big as that. Bill came from the shoe industry in Northampton area, and he went into the Transport and General Workers Union. And Bill was naturally fighting for his membership, and I was fighting for my loyalty to my community. And Bill and I would sit firing bullets and sniping at each other all day, then we'd go and have an Indian curry at night. Bill's now retired out in the West Indies, a wonderful man, but if you look at your union history and just download Bill Morris, what an adversary. We had some real battles, but they were honest. And this is what I wanted with the general rank and file. But Bill set the example. And it affected me to finalize the whole issue. It affected me so deeply because I couldn't do what I'd been trained over 20 years to do. I went and found job satisfaction 3,000 miles away.
So what was your opinion of Maggie Thatcher?
Well, you have to remember that I was born in 1933, and I came up through the war with Churchill and all these eminent men of age and experience. Who were the leaders politically, whatever. I've never had any defined political persuasion, be it Labour, be it Tory, be it Lib Dem. I've just wanted to see honesty and fairness. Poof. That's all the standard I've looked for. And then we had such awful examples of leadership leading up to the appointment of Maggie Thatcher as the Premier. They were so bad. They were so inept. that when Maggie came in, she blossomed, she bloomed. Because to most people, and especially the female side of the country, thought, this is what manna from heaven, a lady, had finally. But don't forget, they had 10 years at least of trouble and strife and ill management, one prime minister after another. None of them worth their salt. She came along and she wielded a big stick. And the women of this country put Maggie Thatcher on a pedestal, not the men of this country. And where we are today, where history repeated itself last night on television, it was what I saw and witnessed with Maggie. Teresa's downfall and Maggie's downfall. No one is bigger than the party they represent. They can lead, they can direct. They're not bigger, they're not aloof. Maggie portrayed an arrogance, a feminine arrogance. It's not insulting that now I am going to sort you lot out. And she did. Facts are there, she did. Until the guys in the trousers got fed up and said, we've had enough. And he got rid of her.
But no.
I'm with you. I can just backtrack what I spoke about earlier about my training in management. The do's and don'ts of management, the disciplinary procedures, the wage structure, the promotion opportunities, working conditions, health and safety. Bearing in mind, the best thing ever happened in this country is health and safety executive. Well, none of this. I had 2 serious accidents. I didn't get a penny compensation. But Maggie got the force of politics behind her to override the trade union by threatening all sorts of action, reaction to their, we'll go on strike, okay, we'll withdraw this, we'll withdraw your benefits, we'll withdraw your pensions, you'll lose all this, you'll lose that, you won't get unemployment benefit. So the challenge was, and she won. But don't forget, there were more people unemployed under Maggie Thatcher than any other leader I know. There could be question on that, but that's as I recall the situation. There were never more men out of work because of Maggie's Iron Lady tactics. She was pretty ruthless. And I didn't have that authority to tackle Bill Morris and his army of trade union delegates up and around the British Isles. But I was only one, the same guy that managed Birmingham and Liverpool and Newcastle and Berwick and Morpeth. We all went through the same. You can't do your job. And Maggie allowed us to do our job. And so her image has not been lost, nor will it be, in my opinion, ever, I don't think. What a lot of people believe in the present leader as to how she has worked and how she's toiled, no one's arguing with that. What she didn't do was find an answer to what 17.4 million people asked for. what Maggie Thatcher did. She did what the whole country asked for, and she stopped the unions from turning the country into turmoil. Yes, I'll tell you for why. Why should they not be questioned or challenged? They're not sacrosanct. They're not beyond being held accountable for what's happening. Equally so, the guy in a union is being told by his membership that's what he's got to do. And so you see, in my life's experience, coming up 86 years, these events in history are still an early learning curve in the humanity, in the employment and the general living standards of everyone in this country. We should have learned from the miners' strike. We should have learned from Maggie Thatcher. We should have learned from Brown and his lies, and Blair and his lies about the war in Iran. What a load of... They must have thought we were all simpletons, weapons of mass destruction. And then his next guy that takes over gives away the country's gold reserves. These are a rolling ball of experiences in life in general. And if we don't learn by them, we're going to suffer the same old silly hurt and pain that we've already experienced, or your fathers or grandfathers have experienced. And I see this, like yesterday, history repeating itself. You know the song, when will we ever learn? When will we ever learn?
One thing that, again, we were talking about in the pre-interview, would you, if you had the chance, be young today, part of our generation?
No, I'm sorry to say I wouldn't. I had the most loving, exciting, honest to goodness childhood, where an orange and an apple and a handful of nuts was in my Christmas stocking. And in 2 days, you realize it was Christmas, and after 2 days, it was all over. We live in a world now, a fanciful world of make-believe, greed, an impossible situation to have independence without being forced into a life that you're not going to enjoy. And when I say that, I want to qualify that by saying, imagine in this country today what it would be if Theresa May said, right, tomorrow morning you'll hand all your mobile phones in to the police station. You'd all be lost. And you forget you've got a kingdom of infinite space between your ears. We're being too materialistic. We're being too mechanical. We're being too reliant on our own intelligence, because it's our intelligence or your intelligence that's bringing out a new gimmick every day. We've got drones can close an airport at the blink of an eye because some kid wants to say, look, Dad, I'm flying over Gatwick. That's my camera. You got it off Santa Claus. I got an orange and an apple, but this is the world today. You're not thinking for yourselves anymore. It's being thought for you. That, I believe, was one of Thatcher's policies. And you know, when I was married in 1956, I bought a little bungalow in Green Lane, Stobhillgate, Morpeth. It cost £990. A little 2-bedroom bungalow. It cost £1,200 with a garage. But being a stonemason bricklayer, I didn't have the garage. I had one kindly friend put enough bricks under the bedroom floor for me to build a garage later on, but the police don't know about that. That little bungalow made me king, and my wife was the queen. It was our palace. We bought it. We owned it. It's now worth £125,000. Now, anyone given the opportunity to buy the house and feel as I did when I was able to buy mine. But it isn't everyone who's able. So if the right to buy is controlled, or let's put it this way, if we build more houses like the little bungalow in Stobhill for me, now, today, instead of these monsters, if you've been to North Tyneside, have you been to Blythe, Bedlington, have you seen these obscene, massive structures designed by a 6-year-old with a set of crayons, a square wall and 4 windows and a door and a pitch? First time to buy, they'll never buy one of those in the next 50 years. Because we're not providing enough. And whether this is from Maggie's day, they didn't follow on her, I'm saying succeeding governments didn't follow on her policy of building. They're only just getting their act together now. If you get the right to buy, take it, because it's every man's home is his castle. A woman's home is their castle. I am a male chauvinist pig, in the sense that I believe that the male of the species is the more dominant of the species. I go back to Caesar and all this in history. And, okay, you'll say, well, we had Boadicea and we had them. But men have always, and in the natural world, 90% of the wild creatures on this planet are dominated by the male. Very few are dominated by the female. One particular animal dominated by the female is the elephant, strangely enough. She is the boss in the herd. And there are others, but mostly the male dominates life on this planet. When Maggie came along, my mind went back to the lady who's buried in Morpeth churchyard, Emily. And I was responsible for maintaining that. Was a part of my job in Morpeth town, so I knew all about Emily and Pankhurst and all this. And if it went to a vote, I don't know, what's the ratio of male to female in the land? I don't know. I've never, I'd have to look that up. I think nature it has determined over generations that the male has been the stronger. But surely, slowly but surely, the female of the species is becoming recognized. I wouldn't say dominant as yet, but we see what happens in the next 2 weeks. whether the male domination will come to the fore, or whether Madam May is strong enough to withstand the impact that's coming. And if she's smart enough, she'll prove her worth next week, or she'll be forever labelled incompetent or inferior. So that's a big, big biggie, repeating itself again. As Maggie came in, this is a big challenge for femininity, or the feminine tomorrow, or whenever. And but from my own personal view, I can't abide to see a woman flagging a line at a football match, unless it's a women's football match. There's 85,000 men and 100 women at the football match, and they've got a girl on the line. And next it's going to be a referee. And I'm thinking, where are we going with this? You've got ladies' football, have lady officials. We've got men's football, we want male officials. This is what we talk about, us menfolk. Where's it going to end? I'm blessed that I've got all this in this kingdom of infinite space, all these memories and these experiences in my head. I've been there, I've seen it, I've done it. I've had more time in hospital in my life. And I got some nurse telling me, what's wrong with me? And she's just about 20. Now, if I react and tell her to go jump in the North Sea, I get into trouble. But she at 20 is able to start telling me how to live my life. I don't think we've reached what would be acceptable from both sides. Not sticking up for a female or male. I think this, like the strike, like what happened yesterday, this is part of the rolling lifestyle we're going through here in America, in the Western world in particular. Most of all, the proof, when the Saudis are free, that's the last brick wall the females have got. And the first one made the move yesterday when she flew to Canada. I was 8 years in Saudi, believe you me. If you think you're not free, go live in Saudi. So, but no one knows about that. But the Western woman will one day be on a par with the Western man. Don't ask me when.